Hi, Buzz Allen here for the Propaganda Game. This is the fifth tape in the series on techniques in the various sections of the game. Today we're going to deal with techniques of form. Most of the techniques in this section deal with the form of logical fallacies or the actual structure of the arguments being made. Some of these are somewhat sophisticated. There are a few Latin terms describing them, but they're actually pretty simple to understand and are amazingly widespread in daily life. The first technique is called concurrency. Concurrency happens when two things exist or appear simultaneously, and someone then claims that one of them is the cause of the other because they appear together. The form of this argument is basically saying because A is present along with B, therefore A is the cause of B. An example is this delightful Facebook meme I once saw where it says, "There are two kinds of countries, those who use the metric system and those who have landed on the moon." And the implication here is that simply because the United States is the only country in the world that has landed on the moon, and we happen to use the traditional English measurement system instead of the metric system, that our measurement system had something to do with our prowess in space, when in fact these are just two simultaneous conditions that are actually unrelated. Post-Hoc is a related technique, somewhat similar to concurrency, but actually the inverse. The word post-hoc means after this, that, in Latin. And what this is suggesting that it is because two events or things follow one another in close succession in time, that the first event must be the cause of the second. So basically saying that if event A precedes event B, therefore A is the cause of B. In this cartoon, somebody's staring at a Venn diagram showing complete situation where all the cases fall in the intersection of these two circles and says, "Gee, everybody who went to the moon has eaten chicken." "Good grief," says the other scientist, "chicken makes you go to the moon." Obviously, this is a post hoc because just because people had chicken and then happened to go to the moon, the eating of chicken was not the thing that got them there. Selected instances is a technique where a person only chooses those cases or instances that back up their argument and ignores or disregards any cases or instances that would contradict or would not support the position. For example, in this meme, someone says, "They say 1 out of every 5 people is Chinese. How is this possible? I know hundreds of people and none of them is Chinese." Well, obviously, most of the people who are Chinese live in China. And if the person making this statement had never been to China and doesn't live in an area where very many Chinese people reside, then their sample of a few hundred people that they know is unrepresentative of what the average population distribution on the planet is. So this is a case of selected instances. Now, a hasty generalization is similar to selected instances, but it is different in one very important way. In a hasty generalization, the person making the generalization jumps to a general or blanket conclusion about the members of a different group on the basis of an unrepresentative or an insufficient number of cases. And the big difference between selected instances and hasty generalization, Hasty generalization generally occurs on a snap emotional basis. Someone just makes a very quick judgment. Selected instances is typically a coldly calculating, dishonest kind of thinking. With hasty generalization, there was really no time to consider, and the person was probably unaware of any opposing instances. Whereas in selected instances, the person is consciously ignoring contradictory cases. And this is clearly a dishonest way of characterizing an argument. Hasty generalization because someone met one or two people who were Republican and racists, and one or two people who were Democrats who were interested in handouts. They come to the blanket conclusion that Republicans are all racists and Democrats all want free stuff. Faulty analogy. When we use an analogy to reason, what we're really doing is we're saying that when we're comparing two pairs of things that are similar, so first thing is similar to another thing in the same way that we believe two other things are similar to each other. Now, if an analogy is reliable, then the reason for the similarity and the comparison between these different pairs of things actually has some basis and bearing in an underlying cause that's related to both of them. In a faulty analogy, there is no underlying causal relationship. In this delightful cartoon that has been slightly modified so as to mask the answer, a young girl says, "It's just a horrible double standard." "What is?" says the man. "How could anyone ever conclude that a man who sleeps around is a macho stud, but a woman who sleeps around is just a slut?" "Well, think about it," the man says. "A key that opened many locks would be a valuable key to have indeed, while a lock that could be opened by almost any key would be virtually worthless." And she thinks for a minute and says, "I can't put my finger on it right now, but there's something horribly wrong with that idea too." And we have substituted the word idea in this comic where the actual author of this cartoon had said analogy, which would have given away what the answer is. Because this certainly is a faulty analogy based on superficial anatomical references. But in any case, locks and keys are certainly not the same thing as human social behavior and courtship. Composition is a technique where we reason that properties of individual elements that are part of a greater whole, the reasoning is that properties of the individual elements will be the same as the entire whole. So the assumption is that because A is a part of the whole B and A has a certain quality, therefore the whole B must also have the same quality. In this meme it states that Walmart boasts 17 million in profits while its workers use 14 billion. Sorry, let's do this again. Walmart boasts 17 billion in profits while its workers use 14 billion in welfare to survive. Walmart, proof that the free market is really corporate welfare. Now in this case, Walmart is only one individual element or representative of a company that's part of the broad general whole that is the free market. And so just because Walmart has the quality of paying its employees so little that they use $14 billion in welfare to survive, this does not necessarily follow that the entire free market of all companies in the country are all on corporate welfare. Division is the technique that's the inverse of composition, With division, we are reasoning that just because there are some properties of the whole, that those properties will automatically be true of all the parts as well. This example, a child reasons, women in the United States are paid less than men, therefore my mom must make less than my dad. Clearly, just because the average earnings of women are less than the average earnings of men in the country, it does not necessarily follow that in one particular instance the mother will make less than the father. They may not even have the same kind of job. She might be a lawyer and he might be a janitor. You don't know. So this is an example of division, and it's the inverse of composition. The last technique in the section for form is non sequitur, another Latin term. Non sequitur means does not follow. In this case, a non sequitur describes any argument in which the conclusion does not necessarily follow from the premises. Now, all of the techniques that we've covered so far are technically non sequiturs, because in every case, because of a fault in the form, the conclusion could not actually be concluded from the premises. But in the propaganda game, we use non sequitur label for techniques which don't easily fit into one of the other techniques of form. An example of non sequitur would be 2 is a number, 1 is a number, therefore 2 equals 1. Obviously, the characteristic of belonging to the set of entities that are a number is not the same thing as mathematical equivalency as it is defined in mathematics. And finally, an example of a no-technique example. Someone says, I don't know what's wrong. Every time I turn on the juicer while the heater is going, we blow a fuse. This is getting old. And this is not either post-hoc or concurrency, which are both techniques of form that deal with causality. In this case, the circuit is overloaded, and so when more than one appliance is used, it blows the fuse. So this is an actual situation where there is a causal relationship in terms of the phenomena that the speaker has observed. So this concludes the section on form. The next video will be on techniques of maneuver.